I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which brings you the big G for the gospel of Jesus Christ and the little g, all the good things that people do to put that gospel of life into action. Hey folks, we have really a special presentation for you today. As you well know, we have a tremendous problem in our world, in our country, and folks, even in our counties, Collier and Lee, with sexual abuse. But in particular today, we're going to talk about sex trafficking of women and children. So what we did, we went over to the Collier County Sheriff's Department and we asked, well, who takes care of these crimes and what are they doing to put an end to them? So we were presented with Lieutenant Wade Williams. And look, in my simple way of putting it, he kind of takes care of those issues pertaining to sexual abuse in our county, Collier County. So there's a big long title that I'm going to ask the lieutenant to give you about his department. Lieutenant Wade Williams, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Father Orsi, and hello, everybody. So I'm the lieutenant of the Intercept Task Force and Victim Services Bureau. Intercept is just an acronym that stands for Interagency, Child Exploitation, and Persons Trafficking.
Okay, now, we have a problem. Not only us, folks, I mean, it's not just us, but Florida's like, number 3 on the list of states where there's a real problem with sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, women and children. And it's here, folks, it's here. It's right in Collier County. And somebody said to me, well, one of the main areas that are trafficked are on Tamiami Trail. Is that true, Lieutenant?
So sex trafficking used to be primarily advertised on the street. So you'd have like a strip, girls walking the street or even children walking the street, controlled by pimps or traffickers. And when we talk about domestic sex trafficking in the United States. And in about 2008, that switched over to the internet. So now it is advertised on what we call escort sites like Mega Personals and Skip the Games. Before that, historically, was Backpage.com. And they're like classified ads, but they advertise for escorts and they use clever terminology like roses instead of dollars. So they'll say 120 roses, donation. And they're just advertisements for prostitution. They're very extreme content on these sites. So I don't recommend visiting any of them yourself because it is fairly graphic, the pictures and videos that they're putting on for these advertisements. And so it happens it's arranged on the internet and happens behind closed doors. So in hotels, at houses that are run like brothels, and that sort of thing. But really, sex trafficking and child exploitation are sort of two sides of the same coin. And you have 3 players in the game, what we call the world or the life of the game. You have the John, who's the person that's arranging for the sex for sexual purposes, right? You have the trafficker, who's doing it primarily for financial reasons. And then you have the victim, which could be a child or a grown person, a woman, primarily women. Many of the women who are involved in sex trafficking as adults started as children. I would say about half of them. And so when we talk about those 3 players in the game, I'd like to describe something to you. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to get ahead of your questioning, but we all have, I would hope at this point that everybody and your congregation and your viewers have seen the movie The Sound of Freedom. So The Sound of Freedom portrays a number of different things, and it's a produced film, but based on a true story. And what we see in the film in the beginning is we see a team of detectives and agents with Homeland Security investigations. Now, our task force, all of my detectives are sworn under the Department of Homeland Investigations. Okay, it's just like they were in that movie. And so in the beginning of the movie, the detectives are doing a covert investigation for a subject that's involved in what we call global trading networks. So that's what this guy was. And so these guys are predators who are exploiting children and also sometimes adults. And they are trading in child sexual abuse material. They're trying to get access to children. They want to talk to other predators about their activities with children. If they have if they're what they call active. Are you active with a child? That means, are you actively sexually abusing a child? They want to hear stories about it. They want to know about it. It is a pervasive issue for them. It is a symptom of a deviant sexual behavior called a paraphilia. And so what you see in the beginning of this movie is you see an individual who is engaging in child sexual abuse material and advertising to children for sex. So he has a connection in South America with the trafficker that's the subject of that movie. And he's advertising children for sex on the dark web, right? And those are called hidden services sites. And what the agents are doing in that case is they're waiting for him to log on. The reason why they're waiting for him to log on is that suspects can take actions to protect their data from law enforcement. It's called operational security. So they will encrypt data, which is a method of obfuscating or concealing your data through changing it using a cipher. That's basically what encryption is. And you have to have a key to decrypt the data. If we don't have the key, we can't get access to the data in some cases. And so they need him to log on to the account so that they can catch him in the act with access to it. So they have to hurry up and come in and kick him away from the computer. And that is very accurate. And then he's arranging, which they then talk to him and they convince him to set up and they trick him, right? Jim Caviezel and who he plays, Tim Ballard, tricks him into arranging for a meeting with a child that he's advertising for sex. He has a connection to this trafficker. And then they set up this big operation to purchase an island and lure in the trafficker with a bunch of children. Okay, so the trafficker is arranging for this sex tourism, which is basically what the trafficker is trying to provide a service for people from all over the world to come and have sex with children on this island as part of this exclusive membership in this movie, right? Which was a reality, and that is true. But who are the guys that are coming to have sex with the children? They don't talk about that in the movie, that part of it. And that's the other side of this coin. So you've got the traffickers and you've got the children, right, that are the victims. And then you've got the Johns, which are these child predators, these global trading, these guys that we refer to as global trading networks that are systematically sexually abusing children, trying to get access to children and exploiting children, and then trying to arrange to meet to have sex with children and with people like the trafficker in this movie. So, and that is essentially what our task force targets, is both the traffickers and those global trading networks of predators who are systematically sexually abusing children, videoing it, taking pictures of it, and trading it with other predators like them around the world.
So you're tracking people that are using the internet to provide child pornography to people who share a common perversion. Can I put it that way?
Yes, that would be accurate.
Okay. Now, when they procure these dark web events, how do they pay for this if it's simply something on the internet? How do they make money off this?
So if payment is made, and many times there is no payment, many times it's a clean trade of files for files. So they want to see what material you have and you want to see material I have. And many times they'll advertise children for sex, unless it's a trafficker. A lot of times the predators themselves will offer their children for sex. In a recent operation that we did called Intercept Launch, one of the individuals we arrested was advertising a 2-year-old child on a dating site for sex, but it wasn't for money. And many times it's not for money. It's just for the pure gratification that they get.
So these are really sickos that we're talking about.
They are sick individuals, yes.
Wow. All right. So they will then, advertise a child. Do they then have access to the child? Is it an active event? How does this work? What happens? Tell us what happens.
So what you have is you have these guys trying to gain access to children. Some of the guys already have access to children because it's somebody that's a family member of theirs or a neighbor, or somehow they have inserted themselves in a situation with a vulnerable mother where they have access to a child, where they're taking care of the child on occasion for them. Sometimes it's because of a case like in the movie where it's a trafficker who's doing that. Now that primarily, if it happens in the United States, it happens differently in different countries, and it happens differently here. Domestic sex trafficking, is different than foreign sex trafficking, and it's different in every country, and it's different in every region. So it is a very large topic, and it depends on the type of trafficking and the location. It really determines kind of how it occurs in those ways. But what you have with regard to what we saw in the movie is you have these predators who are interested in children in any way, in any type of material that they can get or any access they can get to the kids. And so sometimes it's a matter of just meeting guys online that allow them access to the children that they have access to. And sometimes it's going and traveling overseas for sex tourism, or sometimes it's going on an escort site like Mega Personals or Skip the Games, which are websites to advertise escorts, and finding, say, a teen girl or a trafficker who has access to a child on those sites. But when we talk about the scope of the two problems, I want to make something very clear. Trafficking is certainly a horrific crime, and so is child exploitation, right? Because child exploitation is the horrific sexual abuse of children, which is being videotaped and produced for commercial purposes, right? And traded among these guys around the world. But if we look at the scope of the problem, so as an example, to the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, which is the primary clearinghouse for child exploitation cases, what we call cyber tips, reported there's federal and state law that requires companies like Facebook and Instagram to report when they become aware of child exploitation on their platform, whether that be child sex trafficking or child sexual abuse material. What we call child pornography is child sexual abuse material. The amount of reports received in 1 year by them recently for child sex trafficking was about 17,000 reports, a little over 17,000 reports. And that sounds like a pretty high number. And it is a pretty, obviously 17,000 children potentially being sex trafficked is substantial. But compare that to the reports of child exploitation, which would be solicitation of a child for sex by an adult, trading of child, production of child sexual abuse material. So these global trading networks of these predators who are producing material and sharing it with each other, 32 million reports in the same year. So the scope of the problem of child sexual exploitation is many, many times larger than the scope of the problem of child sex trafficking. Not to minimize child sex trafficking, it is certainly a problem and a horrific crime. But it is important to understand how much larger the problem of child exploitation is. And this is a problem that we're trying to tell everybody out there in the community that we have to be vocal about, because if you wouldn't know it existed because it happens on the internet, it happens on the dark web, it happens behind closed doors. So the only way the public is going to know the scope of this problem, this epidemic that we have right now, which has exploded over 1,000% in the last 6 years, over 1,000% increase.
You hear the lieutenant. This is an epidemic, and it's dealing with people who are definitely psychologically messed up people. But think of the lives that they are ruining, little children. And then Lieutenant tells us that a lot of the children, they themselves later on in life, then they go on to become prostitutes themselves. I mean, it's just a terrible, terrible thing. But Lieutenant, my mind is blown with all this stuff, but how big of it is a problem here, right here in our own county? I mean, this is paradise. I mean, we kind of a low crime rate compared to the rest of the world, and yet I'm told it's going on here.
Sure. So last year, let me go back to 2015. So the number of cyber tip reports of child exploitation we got in 2015 was 23 for the entire year. Now, if we get 23 in a month, that would be a low month. So last year we had over 400, and we're on track to get over 500 this year. And this is an exponentially increasing crime.
Right here in Collier.
Yes, Collier County, just Collier County. So the Intercept Task Force is a regional task force, but those are just Collier County numbers. That doesn't include the Lee County Sheriff's Office, which I believe they had over 600 last year. It's much a function of your population. So when we talk about, it doesn't really have any relevance to other crimes. So it's not like if you have, more robberies or burglaries in your area that you'll have a higher incidence of child exploitation. That's not the case, because the offenders in this type of crime don't typically have any criminal history. They're otherwise law-abiding people. They pay their taxes. They follow the speed limit. They just have a sexual deviant issue. And we've arrested, teachers, lawyers, cops. We've arrested many different types of people for this type of crime. So you know, but it's definitely something that is increasing at an alarming rate, more than any other crime that we've seen. You know, we haven't had 1,000% increase in homicides or burglaries or any other crime, and I think people would lose their minds if that were the case.
But how do they get in touch with you to inform you that this is taking place? I mean, is there a hotline? How do they do this?
There are a number of ways that somebody can report suspected child exploitation or trafficking. And that is, the way that we would prefer is that you call our agency directly. So one of the local law enforcement agencies, wherever you live or wherever the crime is happening, call your local agency, report it directly to them, because they're going to be part of either the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force or another federal task force that can handle this, like Intercept. And it just through a patrol deputy, you can make the report or make it over the phone, and then they will route it. We have procedures in place within our agency to make sure that those cases get routed to our task force so that we can handle these cases the proper way. And really, that's what Intercept is all about. Intercept is about leveraging all the technological resources and tools to fully support detectives and agents who work in this area, bring us together under one roof where we can share strategies, do operations, and make us more effective, right? And some of these technologies are really expensive. And that's why we have this task force, because there's a private organization called Operation Lightshine behind this task force that is directly funding salary, vehicles, and ultimately will be funding technology and a facility for all the detectives in this region.
As you can imagine, producing this wonderful program, Action for Life, it costs a great deal of money. We're going to need your help. So if you would like to donate to keep this good news program on the air, please go to your computer, your cell phone, actionforlife.net. Hey gang, I know a lot of you sometimes can't watch all of our episodes of Action for Life. However, we have a solution for that. All you have to do is go to YouTube and search for Action for Life Florida. And you can catch up on all the shows, and guess what? Extra added bonus, you get to hear my weekly homily. So YouTube and you make a fine couple. Hey, now, real live, I hate to put it this way, flesh and blood transactions between a child and an adult. How is this conducted right here in beautiful Collier County? Where do they go? How do they get here? Where are they coming from?
Many of the children that are being sex trafficked, if we're talking purely for commercial, like prostitution purposes, are lured because they're vulnerable. So predators select victims, traffickers select victims based on vulnerability, availability, and desirability in that order. So they all have a type of victim that they prefer, right? But they'll compromise that for an available victim, and they'll compromise an available victim for a vulnerable victim, because vulnerability is the most important thing. So what does that mean? That means they will insert themselves in a situation if they recognize that a particular victim is vulnerable. We had one guy who hired a boy and paid him out of his own pocket for a job that didn't even exist. The boy thought he worked for a particular organization, but he didn't actually work there. This guy was paying him for a fake job that didn't exist because he saw the boy was vulnerable. So he created a situation, and these guys will go to great lengths to do that. But if we're talking about sex trafficking, it's primarily advertised online. So we see girls that are runaway girls, that are vulnerable because they've been in situations at home. Typically, they're running away from something or they're running to something. So many times we see a typical blueprint of a type of victim in this type of case, where they have a history of sexual abuse, physical abuse as a young child, and they really just sort of check out and they start running away and self-harming and things like that. And then they end up meeting this super criminal, which is a trafficker. And I refer to him as a super criminal because we have seen nobody like this particular type of criminal. So we mentioned the child predators, and they are typically, don't violate other laws, don't have a long criminal history. They have a sexual deviancy, but that's not true of traffickers. Traffickers typically have long violent histories. They're psychopathic personalities. The FBI has found that rate of psychopathology to be close to 70% of human traffickers compared to 30% of the general prison population. So we know that these guys are the exceptionally deviant and exceptionally psychopathic, and they don't have empathy. They're very charismatic. Usually they're good talkers, they're good salesmen. They think of themselves as entrepreneurs and businessmen. So when they find a young girl who is exhibiting vulnerabilities, who's a runaway and those sort of things, that's like a flashing red light for them, right? So they jump in and they use different tactics, what we call the seasoning process. So these are the methods and tactics they use to identify and gain control of a victim. Some of them are criminal, like trauma bonding, which would use violence, random acts of violence, fraud, coercion, threats, those sort of things. And some are not. Like they identify, many of these girls have issues where they have not had a supportive family. So they identify that they need that and they offer them that, but never actually give it to them. And that's a tactic that they use, is they identify what are their needs, which many times are not tangible, many times are not money, many times their needs are love and appreciation, acceptance, being part of family. And they pretend that they're going to give that to them, but they don't actually give it to them. They give it to them in a dysfunctional way that involves abuse, manipulation, threats, and other sorts of violence. I haven't met a trafficker yet.
I want to ask you this. How you said they look for a child that is vulnerable. How do you pick out a child that's vulnerable? What do they look for?
They look for girls that are appear to be runaways, are advertising online vulnerability, that they're having problems at home, that they hate their life, they're depressive, they're suicidal, they have drug addictions, girls that appear to need some sort of, they have low self-esteem, that appear to have problems to them, some kind of dysfunction in their life. And those girls are easier to exploit. And then they pretend to provide this, father figure role for them, where they're going to be supportive and loving, and they're really not. And they sell them on this idea. And then they use all these other tactics to kind of wrap them in this manipulation. They're not physically restrained in most cases. They're psychologically restrained, right? They feel indebted to this person. They feel bonded to this person. And it's a very dysfunctional kind of situation, manipulative situation between the two of them. And then they usually advertise them. So they'll advertise them online on these escort sites that I mentioned, or on just a social media platform. And that's how the Johns find the victims who are being trafficked in the United States. Now, what happened in that movie with the child being abducted, forcibly abducted, that would be a very rare event and unlikely to occur in that way in this country. It certainly can happen in other countries like it did in the film. But in this country, when a child is abducted by a stranger, there's only about 150 of those in the entire country in 1 year, stranger abductions. It's a very rare event. And if it does happen, it's all hands on deck. So we have a regional child abduction response team, which I'm a part of. We would all respond. You would know about it. It'd be all over the news. We would talk about this abducted child. We'd have everything, an Amber Alert going out. It would be a big, big deal.
So you're saying that a lot of the cases are because maybe it's a family member trafficking the child, or is that what happens?
It can either be a family member, but many times it's a person that they meet when they run away. So they go to different places, they meet them online, and the person promises all these things, identifies that they're vulnerable, and then they kind of run away with that person. And they might be missing, but they're not formally kidnapped. They left under manipulation, not like abducted, like against their will, screaming, kicking, that kind of thing.
Right. Now, where are these kids? Are they coming from foreign countries? Are they coming over the border? How are they getting here? Are they our own homegrown children, or are they coming from elsewhere?
The cases that we have domestically are going to be 99% American citizen children. So these are children that are local kids. They could be from other jurisdictions, like other areas, other states, traveling around with the pimp. But they're primarily American citizens. So these are not foreign victims. We have had foreign victim cases. Operation Human Freedom was a case that we charged 15 individuals, which was a foreign victim case, but they're vulnerable for different reasons. Usually it's not because of trauma or sexual abuse or coming from troubled homes. They're vulnerable because they're illegal, because they have their family at home, which is being threatened by the Mexican cartels. And generally that's the origin of that type of trafficking. And we can't protect their families back home. And so they're under threat, and they're typically not suffering from drug addictions, the foreign victims. They're vulnerable because they can't just walk down the street and get a job. They don't have a social security number. They don't have credentials. They don't have documents.
Lieutenant, could you tell us what should we be looking for, and how should we, report it to your department?
So if you're talking about victims, then anybody who, so if we're talking about foreign victims, typically those are run like a brothel. So it would be at a particular trailer, usually servicing rural areas. And they would have multiple girls being moved from trailer to trailer around in a circuit, really. Like in the last case we had, it was multiple jurisdictions around the state. And it's word of mouth is how that spread. So if they hear anything involving prostitution, there's a very high probability that there's a pimp involved, and a pimp uses force, uses coercion ubiquitously. And so that would be a human trafficking situation, most likely. So the number one indicator of human trafficking is anything involving the world of prostitution, because that evokes the world of the life of the game and those players, the pimp, the John, and the girl, the victim, right? And anytime you have those three players, they play by a certain set of rules, and that set of rules involves trafficking. It involves coercion and manipulation. So we're really looking for signs of that world. If we're talking about child exploitation, we're looking for children that are withdrawn, that are cutting or having some kind of a depressive or emotional issue, sudden change in the issue, or somebody who has unexplained property that they couldn't have paid for themselves. So they're showing up with cell phones and fancy bags and gifts and rewards. That's typically because they're getting money from a source that they wouldn't be legitimate, or is being provided as a gift or reward in exchange for something like sex.
Hey, folks, you hear the lieutenant. This is serious stuff. You know what to look for. You see something that doesn't look right, you smell a rat, get in touch with Lieutenant Wade Williams, Collier County Sheriff's Department. Lieutenants for action, I'm for action, and I know you are too. We would like to thank our generous sponsors for their wonderful support. Thanks for watching. Please join us next time for Action for Life. I'm for action, and I hope you are too. I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which talks about the gospel of Jesus Christ, the big G, and the little g, all the good things that people are doing to put the gospel of life into action. So please join us for the next episode of Action for Life.